ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतारवरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः. O Ramakrishna, the establisher of the eternal religion, the embodiment of all religions, and the best of all incarnations, we salute thee. In the last reading class, we stopped at para 4 on page 361. We shall continue today from the same para on the same page. If one studies the Master's life of this period in the light of the scriptural sayings quoted above, the how and why of most of the extraordinary realizations, if not all of them, stand fully revealed. One can understand how, as a result of his wholehearted offering of himself at the lotus feet of the Divine Lord, he could attain perfect desirelessness, and how in so short a time he ascended and firmly established himself in the Nirvikalpa plane of knowledge of Brahman. One can understand how he attained Jati Smaratva, as Jati Smarata is the remembrance of the past lives, as a result of which he had the immediate knowledge that the one who had manifested himself as Rama and Krishna in past ages and did good to humanity had again assumed a body and manifested himself in the present age as Ramakrishna. One can understand why he never applied the divine powers for the comforts of his own body and mind, though their manifestations for the good of humanity were matters of almost daily occurrence. Why he could and did awaken in others the powers of realizing spiritual truths by a mere glance or wish, and why his extraordinary influence is slowly and surely spreading into and acquiring mastery over all the countries of the world. Thus did the Master know the past and future of his life at the time of his coming down to the realm of ideas from the non-dual state, though he was finally established in the state. But all those experiences do not seem to have come to him on one day or all of a sudden. He, we infer, had the perfect knowledge of all these things in a year after his coming down to the realm of ideas. During this time, the Mother of the Universe was removing, as it were, veil after veil from before his eyes, explaining clearly those things to him day after day. If we are asked why all those experiences were not revealed simultaneously to the Master's mind, we reply that established in the non-dual state of consciousness and completely lost in the bliss of Brahman, he had no time or inclination to know them till the modification of his mind took an outward direction. Thus was fulfilled the Master's earnest prayer to the Mother of the Universe at the beginning of the sadhana. Mother, I do not know at all what I should do. I will learn what you thyself will teach me. The realization of the Master that the attainment of the non-dual consciousness is the ultimate aim of all disciplines. Firmly established in the plane of the non-dual consciousness, the Master had the realization of another fact also. He came to feel in his heart of hearts that the realization of non-duality was the ultimate aim of all kinds of disciplines. For having performed sadhanas according to the teachings of all the main religious denominations prevalent in India, he had already been convinced that they all took non-dual state. He therefore said to us over and over again, it is the final, my child, the ekme, which comes of itself in the life of all aspirants as the ultimate development of their love of God. Know it to be the last word of all faiths, and the faiths that are only paths and not the goal. The above mentioned realization. Having thus had the direct experience of non-duality, the Master's mind was filled with unbounded Catholicity. He had now an extraordinary sympathy for all the religious communities which taught that the aim of human life was the realization of God. But he did not realize at first that the said Catholicity and sympathy were his discoveries, and that no aspirant, not even the foremost of them in the past, could attain them as fully as he, such is our impression, became gradually acquainted with that fact by coming into contact with the wise sadhakas belonging to various religious communities at the Kali temple at Dakshineshwar and at other well-known places of pilgrimage. But thenceforward, he was very much wounded whenever he came across one-sidedness in religion, and he tried in all ways to remove that mean attitude. The Master's practice of Islam. We can clearly understand from an event of this time how liberal the Master's mind, which was firmly poised in the non-dual knowledge, now became. The Master, we have seen, was ill for a few months after he had realized the zenith in the practice of the non-dual mood. The event came to pass when he had come around. A short time previously, one Govinda Rai had been in search of truth for some time. Hriday told us that he was a Kshatriya by birth, this Govinda Rai. He was perhaps learned in Persian and Arabic. Having studied various religious doctrines and come in contact with different religious communities, he was at last attracted by the liberal doctrine of Islam and was formally initiated into it. Govinda, thirsting for truth, accepted the Islamic faith, but we cannot say how far he followed its social manners and customs. But since he became initiated, he, we were told, engaged himself ardently in the reading of the Quran and in religious practices according to the process prescribed by that scripture, by the Quran. Govinda was an ardent lover of God. The method of worshipping God according to the teaching and mental attitude prevalent amongst the Sufis, followers of a sect of Islam, seems to have captivated his mind. Sufism is very near Vedanta, in the sense they consider God as a beloved. So they worship God thinking that he is our beloved. So this point of love is something that distinguishes the belief of the Sufis. So from Govinda Rai, Sri Ramakrishna learns this Sufi Islam. So the Islam practiced by Sri Ramakrishna was the Sufi Islam, which we may all remember. America was investigating the various sects of Hinduism in America after that WTO catastrophe in 2001, they found out after so much of research that Islam of Sufism is very good for America because it preaches love and brotherhood and God as a beloved of the aspirant. So it is astonishing that Sri Ramakrishna had practiced Sufism as the thing of Islam religion, and he had acquired mastery over it. For he now became engaged day and night in practicing devotional moods like the dervishes. Dervishes is the devotees belonging to Sufism. The arrival of Sufi Govinda. Somehow or other, Govinda now came to the Kali temple at Dakshineshwar and began to spend his time there with his seat spread under the peaceful shade of the Panchavati, which he thought was a place favorable to religious practices. Muslim fakirs as well as Hindu sadhus who had renounced the world were welcome at Rani Ratmani's Kali temple, and the hospitality of the temple was equally accorded to both of them. Therefore, while staying there, Govinda had not to go round for alms. He spent his days joyfully meditating on his chosen ideal. The master's resolve. The master was attached towards the devout Govinda, and happening to converse with him, was charmed with Govinda's sincere faith in and love of God. Thus was the master's mind now attracted towards the Islamic religion. This also, thought he, is a path to realization of God. The sportive mother, the source of the infinite Leela, has been blessing many people with the attainment of her lotus feet through this path also. I must see how through it she makes those who take refuge in her attain their desired end. I will be initiated by Govinda and engage myself in the practice of the spiritual mood. This is what he resolved. Initiated by Govinda. Thought was immediately put into action. The master expressed his desire to Govinda, became initiated, and engaged himself in practicing Islam according to its prescribed rules. The master said, I then devoutly repeated the holy syllable Allah, wore cloth like the Muslims, said namaz thrice daily, and felt disinclined even to see Hindu deities, not to speak of saluting them, inasmuch as the Hindu mode of thought vanished altogether from my mind. I spent 3 days in that mood and had the full realization of the result of practices according to that faith. In 3 days, he could attain to the highest in that religion. At the time of practicing Islam, the master at first had the vision of an effulgent, impressive personage with a long beard. Afterwards, he had the knowledge of the all-pervading Brahman with attributes and merged finally in the attributeless Brahman, the Absolute. So he had the vision of the messenger of Islam in a human form. Then he went further in his thought world, then merged into Brahman with attributes. Then finally Brahman without attributes, the highest Advaita realization. At the time of practicing Islam, the master wanted, said Hriday, to take Muslim food, to complete all the paraphernalia of being a Muslim. It was Mathur's solicitous request only that made him refrain from doing so. So many things that the social customs of Islamic religion may not be acceptable to the Hindu people, and it may not be in consonance with the Hindu social customs. Therefore, Mathur did not want Sri Ramakrishna to follow even the food of the Muslims. So, with great persuasion, he was made to refrain, knowing that the childlike master would not abstain from it if the desire of his were not at least partially fulfilled. Mathur had a cook brought, under whose instruction a Brahmin cook means a Muslim cook, was brought, and he instructed a Brahmin cook who prepared the food in the Muslim manner, which was given to the master to eat. So the master did not even once enter the inner courtyard of the Kali temple while practicing Islam, but remained in the mansion of Mathur situated outside. Here we see when you follow the Karma Kanda, this outer rituals and the practices, social practices of religions, they come under what you call as the ritualistic part of religion, Karma Kanda. In Karma Kanda, there is no place for reason. Even in Vedic literature, Veda is divided into two parts. One is Karma Kanda, another is Jnana Kanda. Jnana Kanda is the Jnana Yoga, the Upanishadic teachings interpreted by all the acharyas. That's called Vedanta. But the Karma Kanda is called the Mimamsa. So this Mimamsa, there is no place for reason. If you do this one, you will get this result. So we were, first of all, made to go through this discipline of studying with Mimamsa. One of the first lessons we were given was when we asked some questions. So they said, no, there is no question of reasoning here. Here the ritual says, the scripture says, you do this in this way, you will get this result. You cannot have any question. Suppose there is an alternative thing in place of this one. Suppose I use something else. No, that question does not arise. If you use something that is not told there in the scripture, the whole ritual is gone. You lose the whole fruit of that one. So either it will completely follow it and get the fruit. If there is something which you do not want to follow the scripture, the whole thing is gone. So that is the very nature of these social customs, ritualistic customs of almost all the religions. That is why Sri Ramakrishna had to follow, even in food also. Therefore, to satisfy his needs, Mathur Babu brought one Muslim cook. He would instruct the Brahmin cook to cook the food that the Muslims take on such and such an occasion. This one you should take. He should eat like this. Sometimes you take only drink. Sometimes you fast. All this were instructed and he followed it. From the event mentioned above, it becomes clear how sympathetic the master's mind became towards other religious communities after he had attained perfection in the Vedantic discipline. It is also becomes clear now, by having faith in the Vedantic knowledge alone, the Hindus and the Mohammedans of India may become sympathetic towards one another and develop a brotherly feeling. This is the author's opinion. Considered opinion is, if we take to Vedantic ideas, if we believe in the Vedantic idea that everyone is Atman, there is no distinction of religion, caste or creed or color in the Atman. So we are all children of Atman. We are all Atman, part and parcel of God. God is one for all religions. Men are also, after all, they all belong to one humanity. So God is in everyone. Whether he is a Muslim or a Hindu or a Christian or a Buddhist, we are all equal as parts and parcel of God, as children of God. So what else can there be between us than brotherhood? So the author concludes, through the Vedantic ideas, spreading the Vedantic ideas among everyone. All the people of all religions will come nearer and there will be a religious brotherhood or sisterhood. So that's the author's premise and promise. Otherwise, as the master used to say, there is, as it were, a mountain of difference between them, the social customs, etc., between the Hindus and Muslims. There are a lot of differences. Their thoughts and faiths, actions and behavior have remained quite unintelligible to one another in spite of their living together for so long a time. Almost 1,000 years, Hindus and Muslims are living together, but they seem to be living separate compartments without assimilating each other's points and coming nearer and live as a single brotherhood. Does the practice of Islam by the Master, the divine incarnation of this age, indicate that the said difference would someday disappear and both the Hindus and Muslims would embrace one another in love? Does it indicate? That is a question left for us to decide. So the author poses that question to us because the incarnation of the age, when he practices that all religions are equal, so he practices Islam also and follows the Islamic customs and Hindu customs all in one person. So he did not give up his religion, but he was friendly to all the religions. And all other religious people also were friendly to him. All this indicates when it has happened in the life of an incarnation, whatever the incarnation usually practices, that will be the precept for the generations to follow. Because the incarnation comes only for a short period. In the case of Sri Ramakrishna, he passed away when he was 50 years old. Only after about 10 years, last 10 years of his mission, preaching his religion of harmony. But after his passing away, will everything end? So many great saints and seers have said, no, incarnations come not only for the physical existence, but they eternally live. They come and then they enact a drama. This drama is going to be the epic, is the scripture for the next 1,000 or 1,500 years. We go on singing the glory of incarnation. We sing the glory of Krishna, Rama, Jesus, Buddha. So by singing their glory, we become holy and we become their followers. So their religion will continue, their teachings will continue. Similarly, whatever incarnation does, he leaves it behind as sort of a heritage to his followers. Then the followers will carry it on. So suppose in India, this legacy of Sri Ramakrishna practicing Islam and Hinduism together, if this gets into the mind of all the Muslims and Hindus, then they say, you see the incarnation age, so he has practiced together. So we are together, then both the religions are true. And we should be able to come together, find out what are all the common things that are there. Let us go on taking up the common things and then be friendly. Leave alone the contradictory things. So some such way will open up. That is what the author is mentioning or indicating. As the results of his being established in the plane of Nirvikalpa consciousness, the memory of non-duality used to be suddenly awakened in him, off and on, even by the sight of things and persons within the bounds of the plane of duality, merging him in the absolute. We saw that state brought on him by the slightest association of ideas, even without his desiring it. It is therefore superfluous to add that he could ascend any moment to that plane by a mere wish. It will be clear from the trifling events to be just mentioned how deep and wide was his non-dual mood and how dear it was to him. A few examples. The gardeners found it inconvenient to sow kitchen vegetables in the spacious temple garden at Dakshineshwar, when it became covered with growing grass in the rainy season. Therefore, grass cutters were allowed to cut and take away the grass from there. One day, having got the permission to take away grass without paying any price for it, an old grass cutter cut grass joyfully, bundled it, and was about to go to sell the same in the market. The master saw that the old man had cut so much grass out of avarice that it was beyond his power to carry or even lift up that load of grass. That means bite too much than what you can gulp. Exactly, he could not lift, but he has cut so much grass with the avarice that if he takes so much to the bazaar, he will get more money. But the indigent grass cutter refused to acknowledge it. He was struggling to carry away all that one, which was not possible. And in spite of his repeated efforts in various ways to lift that big bundle upon his head, he failed miserably. It is a very peculiar situation. While looking on it, the master was inspired with spiritual emotion and thought, the self, the knowledge infinite, abides within, and so much of foolishness and ignorance outside. He is Atman. Atman is full of infinite joy. And infinite joy is there. It doesn't require money. Money, what can give? Only a pittance of joy it can give. He has got infinite joy inside himself. If he had known it, he would not have come here to cut grass first, number one. If he cut the grass also, just like others, enough that we could carry. Only that much he would have cut. So much foolishness. But inside him also, infinite Atman is there with infinite knowledge. This idea arose in him. And, O Rama, inscrutably they play, said he, and he entered into ecstasy. He went into samadhi. So, small things would throw him into this Advaitic state. An injured butterfly, another example. One day at Dakshineshwar, the master saw a butterfly flying with a tiny stick stuck into its tail. He was at first pained to think that some naughty urchin has done it, but the next moment he was inspired and burst into laughter, saying, O Rama, thou hast brought thyself to this plight. Pitying the butterfly, O Rama, you are suffering like this yourself. Because butterfly also is Rama only. If that mischievous urchin is Rama, then the butterfly also is Rama. Why did this butterfly go near that urchin? And he stuck it into his tail, a stick. So he says, O Rama, thou hast brought thyself to this plight, and started laughing at it. Another example, the new dhurva grass trampled. At one time, a particular spot of the garden of the Kali temple was covered with newly grown dhurva grass, which we use in the temple for worship. The grass we use in the temple is called the dhurva grass, and was beautiful to look at. While he was looking at it, the master transcended the normal consciousness and was feeling identified with that spot when a man just happened to walk across that field, at which he became very restless, feeling unbearable pain in his chest. He was looking at this grass on a plot of land. He got identified. That means his entire personality, he got into that piece of land It became part and parcel of his personality, his person. So somebody trampled on that grass and he thought, he felt that he had trampled on his own body. So he had got marks on the body and became very restless, feeling unbearable pain in his chest, as if somebody had walked on his chest. Mentioning that event, he said to us later, I felt that just that kind of pain which is felt when anybody tramples on one's chest. So his identification with anything he looked at it was complete. He would become part and parcel of that. That state of Bhava Samadhi is very painful. Although I had it for 6 hours only, it became quite unbearable. So if you look at a piece of land very intently, you get identified with it, you become part and parcel of it. That's what had happened to Sri Ramakrishna. The master's body was injured. One day, the master was in Bhava Samadhi, another example, was looking on the Ganges, standing at the spacious ghat with the open portico. 2 boats were at anchor at the ghat, and the boatmen were quarrelling over some matter. The quarrel became gradually bitter, and the stronger man gave a severe slap on the back of the weaker. At that, the master cried out suddenly with pain. Hridaya heard it from the Kali temple, went there quickly and saw the master's back had become red and swollen. Master had nothing to do with that. One boatman beat the other boatman, and the other boatman must have got that bruise on his back, but this bruise appeared on Sri Ramakrishna's back. Impatient with anger, when Hridaya saw this one, Hridaya said repeatedly, Uncle, show me the man who has beaten you. I will tear off his head, cut off his head. When afterward the master quietened down a little, Hridaya was astonished to hear of the event and thought, is it ever possible? Girish Chandra Ghosh heard the event from the master's lips and narrated it to us. So this has been heard from Hridaya through another devotee. That devotee has narrated this one to this author. So the authenticity of the incident is very clear. Innumerable events of this nature regarding the master may be mentioned, but we refrain from doing so to avoid superfluity. So his power of concentration was extreme. So when he was in that mood after the Advaitic realization, so his mind could ascend to the highest level, getting identified as anything at which he spread his look, he looked at, he would become one with that. That was the tremendous concentration of his mind. So thus we come to the end of the chapter. We go to the next chapter now, chapter 17, the master's visit to his native village. The master suffered for 6 months, and then his body was rid of the disease, and his mind became to a great extent habituated to dwell in Bhava Mukha, the plane of consciousness consisting of both duality and non-duality. Duality means our ordinary world. So he was aware of the ordinary world. He could meet any one of us, he could talk to us, he would remember us. So he was very normal with the world also. Simultaneously he was aware of existence of God in his own heart, in the heart of everybody. So all-pervading God also was there in his consciousness. So we have got one, the other one we don't have. So when some people are there in deep samadhi, they have only one God, so they forget the world. Here was the incarnation, who had both of them simultaneously in his mind. He was aware of God also as being inside his heart and inside the heart of everyone. And he was aware of the world also. So it is an extraordinary condition, what is called bhava mukha. It is a very tremendous, distinct realization by the master. But his body was not as strong and healthy as before, and it was feared that his dysentery might recur for want of pure drinking water when the waters of the Ganga became saline during the rainy season. And the waters of Ganga were used for cooking in the temple, and he had to take the prasad from the temple, and he would daily take. So because with the saline water, his stomach would be upset again. So that was his misgiving. It was therefore settled that he should go to Kamarpukur, his birthplace, for a few months until the saline water problem is solved. When the season changes, when the floods and dirtied water settle down, when the winter comes, then he can come back to Dakshineshwar. That was the idea. This was in 1867. Arrangements were made for him to go to Kamarpukur, his birth village. The devout Jagadamba Dasi, wife of Mathur Babu, knew that the master's household was ever poor like that of Shiva. So she knew as a householder that his family was not rich. So she made arrangements with much care about all the necessary articles so that father might not have inconvenience of any kind. So even if he goes to village, so he is the guru of them, Jagadamba Dasi, Mathur Babu, Rani Rasmani, etc. Therefore we should take care of him. So she sent perhaps all the groceries and other things that may be required for his 4-month stay there. So they made all arrangements. The master then started at an auspicious moment. Hridaya and the Bhairavi Brahmani accompanied him. But his aged mother stuck to her previous resolve of living on the Ganga and stayed at Dakshineshwar under Mathur's care. It is a great thing. She did not want to go with son to Kamarpukur, to her own village, saying, no, I would like to spend my time on the banks of Ganga. So much of reverence for Ganga. If you stay on the banks of Ganga, all your sin will be washed away. You will certainly go to the highest heaven, reach the highest spiritual place after your death. These are all great convictions among the old people of that time. So she had that conviction. I shall not leave the banks of Ganga, and which she carried out. She did not move out anywhere. He died on the banks of Ganga. Sri Ramakrishna himself went and wanted to perform a ceremony, etc. But because he was a sannyasi, he could not do it. He got it done through others. How did she stay here all alone, leaving her son? So here it is said, she stayed at Dakshineshwar under Mathur's care. Mathur had great love for Sri Ramakrishna and equal love for his mother also. We know previously also, he went and asked his mother, please ask something from me. Where the mother said, I don't have anything to ask. You have already provided everything. So that was a sweet relationship between them. So Mathur took care of her every day, like Sri Ramakrishna would take care of her. These are all great things we should notice in those people, extraordinary things. Where is Mathur, or where is Chandramani, and where is Sri Ramakrishna? What a tremendous relationship of love. So these are things which astounds us when we read. The master had not come to Kamarpukur for the past 8 years. Therefore, his relatives, it is superfluous to add, were eager to see him. And it needs no mention that there were special reasons for it. For many strange rumors had reached their ears from time to time, namely, he was crying, Hari, Hari, in a woman's dress, that he had become a monk that he was repeating Allah, Allah continually, so on and so forth. But as soon as the master was in their midst, they all found how baseless were the rumors, for they found that he was just his old self, the same amiability, the same loving merriment, the same austere truthfulness, the same profound religious care, and the same surging of overwhelming emotion at the time of Hari. All this, at the name of Hari, all these old qualities of his were seen in him in the fullest measure as before. So they did not find any change at all. So there was baseless humor. Always it is said, the rumors, they start like a small speck and they become a mountain size. By the time they travel some 10 years, each one will add something to it. It becomes bigger. So a small speck will be appearing like a mountain when the 10th man repeats it to the 11th man. The rumors have that nature. So people had carried all these rumors against him. But the villagers found, no, he is the same Gadai, same Gadadhar of this village. The only change they found in him was that his body and mind were glowing with such an indescribable heavenly effulgence that they felt a great hesitation to appear before him suddenly or to broach worldly topics when he did not taught them himself. So there was a sort of a divine aura around him. His body was shining, his words were divinely inspired. So they were rather afraid to go near him and feel very lenient with him. Again, they all felt that their worldly anxiety disappeared into thin air, so to say, when they were near him, and that there flowed in their hearts a serene and tranquil current of bliss and peace. Whoever went to him, they felt bliss and peace. But when they were away from him, they experienced a strong, inexpressible desire to go to him once more. Thus, there was an incessant flow of bliss in that poor family when they had him in their midst after so long a time. So, now we will see how he happened and how he treated all the people of the village, and then how they felt so intimate with him. And on one side, he was a unique incarnation of God. He was distinct from even the highest gods, so different from them. At the same time, he could identify himself with the common villagers, and they felt he is their own. That was the greatness of Sri Ramakrishna. In fact, that is the greatness of all the great spiritual people. They what they call as easy of accessibility, Saulabhya. About Sri Ramachandra, the Valmiki sings, Saulabhya Paripurnaya Sattvodriktaya Mangalam. Saulabhya Paripurna, full of easy accessibility. It is said such people, when other people go to him, they make them feel easy. They don't wait for the other people to talk to them. They themselves open the topic. How did you come? When did you arrive here? They start the conversation. Being such people, great people, they want to put you into ease. So that was Sri Ramakrishna's characteristic. So we will hear much more about this stay in Kamarpukur in our next reading. Niranjanam nityamanantarupam bhaktanukampadhrita vigraham vai Ishāvataram parameshamidhyam tam Ramakrishnam shirasa namama. O Ramakrishna, the taintless one, the one with infinite forms, the one who has assumed a form out of compassion the incarnate Supreme Soul, and the adorable Lord of all, we salute Thee, bowing our heads before You. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.